Hey Guildenchain, what's up?
Hi there. I've been doing some thinking about how there seems to be a quiet monetary revolution in progress worldwide. And that got me thinking about the nature of money. So I thought I'd come talk to my best mate Rosencoin about it.
Sure, that sounds like fun. I agree, it does feel like we're watching a slow-motion monetary train wreck, or a revolution, or something pretty drastic.
For sure. I think it's because a lot of folks around the world have figured out that the existing fiat currency and banking system really only works for the 0.1%.
What's been called the dismal decimal.
Right. It does look like the economic progress of the past few decades has been flowing mainly to the elites, the billionaire donor class, big government, and mega corporations. At least in Western countries.
Well, it seems that way because it is. Inflation-adjusted wages for the 90% are stagnant since the 1970s, while the only things that really go up are the prices of financialized assets owned by the top 10%. And for everybody else, they're dead load as they try to stay afloat. It's the inevitable consequence of a money system built on debt-based currencies issued by central banks.
A lot of people appear to be saying that, too. That central banks are the enemies of the public, but the benefactors of the state and the Davos crowd.
They say it because they cracked the code. These days we don't even need G. Edward Griffin or Ron Paul to explain to us how central banks work against everyone except the powers that be. It's out in the open for all to see. Have you ever heard of the Cantillon effect?
Can't say I have. Sounds French.
Indeed, Richard Cantillon was a French economist in the 18th century. His eponymous effect states that those who are closest to the creation of new money gain the most benefit from its creation. Those who are farther away gain less, and also have to suffer with the effects of the resulting price inflation.
Wow, I guess that explains why new central bank money like dollars, euros, pounds, yen, and so on, always flows to the top.
Yes. When money is borrowed into existence, the people who get most of it, and at the lowest rates, are the biggest borrowers with the biggest lines of credit, namely banks, megacorps, and people who are already rich. And governments, of course. It's funny, but leftists have ranted for decades that trickle-down economics doesn't work, and yet their beloved central bank system is based on pure trickle-down monetary policy.
Wait, Rose, why do you say that central banks are beloved by leftists? I thought they cared about the common people.
Because the central bank's money creation benefits government more than anybody else, except possibly for the banks themselves. That allows for deficit spending, which facilitates the growth of government. It lets the public sector drain resources from the private sector without raising taxes.
But doesn't public sector spending also pump up growth in the private sector? That's why they call it stimulus, right?
No, Gil, it doesn't. Just because they call it stimulus doesn't mean it's actually stimulating anything. While making easy credit available can work to stimulate consumer spending, the problem is that consumer spending only causes the creation of low-grade jobs that satisfy consumer demand, like store clerks, waitresses, and bartenders. Especially when the actual goods are being manufactured somewhere else and imported. All of that consumer spending comes at the expense of savings and investment that would have fostered innovation and the growth of new industries that could have provided decent career jobs. The end result is actually a net loss of jobs over time, not to mention lowering of the quality and pay scales of the jobs in the economy. Friedrich Hayek considered this a test of a good economist. Do they understand why increased consumer spending does not translate into a net gain in jobs, or higher wages?
I'll bet most economists flunked.
Of course, because they are almost all courtiers and stenographers for the existing top-down system that pays them.
So in economist lingo, the opportunity cost of consumer spending is lost future economic growth.
Right, since it's only through the accumulation of capital that the productivity of labor increases, and wages rise. Or to put it another way, so-called stimulus is merely a feel-good mechanism for transplanting high-paying jobs from the future into low-paying jobs in the present. Do enough of it, and you'll hollow out the economy until you basically have no future. Central bank stimulus essentially works like a regressive tax.
That's depressing. Especially since the worse things get, the more stimulus they'll do.
And the more poison all the victims will vote for, and swallow. Sad.
I guess it's no wonder there's so much interest in cryptocurrencies.
Sure. But central banks are interested in cryptocurrencies, too. Many of them have some kind of pilot project underway studying the idea of issuing a CBDC, a central bank digital currency. Not to mention international groups like the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements.
Would that help at all?
No, of course not. In fact, it would be worse than what we have now, due to the elimination of physical cash and the complete loss of all financial privacy. Letting the central banks and governments implement the solution is no solution at all. Facebook's proposed Lyra stablecoin is pretty much the same thing.
If not worse. I mean, it's Facebook, where you are the product.
True. But actually I think Lyra is already dead. The banks and government clearly don't want a company so immense competing with their money monopoly.
Not to mention the fact that nobody with brains enough to tie their own bootlaces would trust Mark Zuckerberg with a burnt-out match.
Huh? Not to mention that.
So what's the solution then, Rose?
Exactly what Dr. Hayek prescribed back in 1976, the denationalization of money. Hayek saw that money was too important, too foundational to the economy, to be entrusted to government, whether they manage it themselves or contracted out to a private central banking cartel. To have a real monetary revolution that will bring about an economic renaissance, what we need is privately issued digital currencies that can compete with one another for market share. We have competition in virtually every good or service, but not in our money. When it comes to money, we have only a monopoly franchise propped up by legal tender laws.
Which brings us back to cryptos.
Yes, because they're the first new asset class in decades. They can be issued and circulated outside of existing currency and banking structures.
I'd agree with that. Yet most of the people and companies I see in the crypto space are constantly advocating that crypto has to be shoehorned into regulation and governance, just like securities and national fiat currencies. They claim it gives the industry legitimacy.
But Gil, legitimacy isn't the point. The entire existing economic system is itself legitimate. Yet we already know that it doesn't work, except for the billionaire class and the companies and governments they control. The point is to replace the system, not to join it. If you play Mother May I games with the establishment, the answer will always be no, the instant you try to do anything worthwhile. And if they say yes, well, congrats, you have been assimilated.
So you mean that the worthwhile thing about blockchain is that it can be used to decentralize the issuance of cryptocurrency?
It can also be used for other things, but yes, issuing money is clearly the killer app for blockchain. The Bitcoin maximalists are definitely right about that. Attempts to separate blockchain from cryptocurrency are misguided at best. Distributed public ledgers don't solve the problem of people putting lies into the ledger, so all this talk about trustless data is mostly nonsense.
So in the world according to Rosencoin, is Bitcoin the ultimate crypto, because its issuance is the most decentralized?
No, although it might be the ultimate crypto asset, in the sense of being a form of digital gold. Bitcoin lacks scalability and privacy. And because its limited supply makes it deflationary, it's great as a reserve asset, but unsuitable for commerce. There's this thing called Gresham's law, which states that bad money drives out good. Who would buy something with their good Bitcoin, which is likely to go up over time, when they can spend their bad dollars or whatever instead? Which are sure to lose purchasing power over time. Like the ad slogan says, for everything else, there's MasterCard.
I hadn't thought of it that way. So you think most of the world's Bitcoin will stay in vaults, just like most of the world's gold does? What then are the qualities of a currency that can do what we need in order to act as a true circulating free market money?
Great question, Gil. I'd say there are four main characteristics. First, both the issuance and the circulation of the currency must have the property of strong censorship resistance. It must be hard to prevent the coins from being minted, or spent. Second, spending the currency must have the same level of privacy that physical cash does. Double spending must be prevented using a scalable mechanism, but at the same time there can be no record of the transaction available to anyone who wasn't a party to it. No public history. Third, In order to grow the user base to a critical mass where merchants will want to accept the currency, it must pay its users for holding it, and also for promoting it. In other words, it must be a growth currency that runs the Cantillon effect in reverse, from the bottom up, earliest adopters first. Fourthly and finally, it must be backed by credible reserve assets so that even given all the growth paid to holders, it will never collapse to zero. What reserve ratio would be needed? Time will tell, but I'd guess somewhere between 10 and 50%. If you have more than 50% backing, I fear you'll be seen as a proxy for the underlying asset, and become subject to Gresham's law. This is why I think the ideal cryptocurrency will not be Bitcoin, but something with an elastic supply backed by Bitcoin, with a minting rate scaled to match the market demand for it.
You've really put a lot of thought into this. Am I right in supposing that you've already identified a cryptocurrency that has all of these properties?
Absolutely. The Ascension Foundation's Lyra currency is designed to have all four of these properties. The scalable, censorship-resistant private spends plus the growth aspects are already built in, and wide-scale marketing is now starting up globally.
Did you say Lyra, like the money in Turkey, or that Italy used before the euro?
Goodness no. It's Lyra with a Y.
Cool. So where do I find out more, and how do I get some if I decided I wanted to buy some Lyra?
If you just want to do some research, visit https://www.ascension.foundation. You'll find the white paper there and some other info. A short version all on one page can be found at https://cryptowealth.com. But if you want to buy some, you'll need to contact the person who sent you to this video.
What, you mean Lyra isn't being sold to the public, like all those ICOs were?
Nope. To buy it you must be introduced by someone who's an authorized agent. Same if you wanted to become a sales agent yourself, you must be sponsored by someone. It's strictly a members-only club.
Bit like a secret society then. Membership has its privileges.
Exactly.
Well, I've got to be running along now. This has been a great little chat. I'll come back soon and we'll talk some more about all of this.
You do that. Looking forward.
See you, Rosencoin.
Later days, Guildenchain.